Hey everyone! Tonight, we're traveling back more than 1,000 years to discover a surprising secret hidden beneath layers of fur blankets, wooden longhouses, and crackling fires. When most people imagine Vikings, they picture fierce warriors crossing icy seas with axes in hand. But when the battles ended and darkness settled over Scandinavia, those same warriors returned home to something many of us struggle to find today: deep, peaceful sleep. How could people living through brutal winters, with no electricity, no central heating, and no modern mattresses, actually sleep so well? The answer might surprise you. Along the way, you'll discover the warm Viking homes built to trap heat, the thick wool bedding that kept entire families comfortable, the nightly rituals that prepared both body and mind for rest, and the fascinating reasons many historians believe their natural sleep patterns were healthier than our own. If you enjoy relaxing history told slowly enough to help you unwind, consider subscribing and joining us for more peaceful journeys through the past. There are many more forgotten worlds waiting to explore together. Now, dim the lights, get comfortable beneath your own blanket, and let us quietly step inside a Viking longhouse on a freezing winter night. The cold greets you first. It arrives silently, slipping across the snow-covered hills before brushing against your face like invisible fingers. Above, the northern sky glows with countless stars, sharp and brilliant in the clear winter air. The sea rests somewhere beyond the darkness, hidden beneath drifting mist, while tall pine forests stand motionless beneath heavy blankets of snow. Ahead, a single building glows softly. It is longer than any ordinary house, its thick timber walls disappearing into the darkness at either end. Smoke rises lazily through roof vents, carrying the comforting scent of burning birch and pine. Small pools of amber light escape through narrow openings, inviting travelers toward warmth rather than warning them away. This is a Viking longhouse, the center of family life throughout much of Scandinavia during the Vikings' age. Before entering, you pause beside the weathered wooden doorway. The walls are built from massive oak beams fitted tightly together, designed not only to endure violent storms but also to hold precious warmth inside. Layers of turf rest across the roof, blending the house into the landscape itself. During winter, fresh snow settles over the grass-covered roof like another protective blanket, quietly helping the home stay warm while freezing winds race overhead. You push the heavy wooden door open. Immediately, the icy silence outside gives way to something entirely different. Warm air wraps gently around you. The smell of smoke mixes with drying herbs, fresh wool, cooked barley, animal hides, and pine resin. The fire crackles softly in the center of the room, sending dancing shadows across carved wooden pillars that support the roof high above. Nothing inside feels luxurious by modern standards, yet nothing feels empty either. Every object has purpose. Simple wooden benches line the walls. Chests filled with clothing sit beneath sleeping platforms. Tools hang neatly from beams. Woven baskets overflow with wool waiting to become thread. A sleeping dog barely lifts its head before drifting comfortably back to sleep near the warmth of the hearth. Several families move quietly through their evening routines. An elderly woman gently spins wool by firelight. A father repairs a leather boot with careful hands. Children whisper beneath blankets, already growing drowsy after a long winter day outdoors. No glowing screens demand attention, no distant engines disturb the silence, only quiet conversation, gentle laughter, the rhythmic popping of firewood, and the steady breathing of people whose day is naturally coming to its end. Outside, winter remains harsh and unforgiving. Inside, the longhouse feels almost timeless, its thick walls separate two completely different worlds, one ruled by ice and darkness, the other by warmth, family, and quiet comfort. Perhaps this contrast shaped Viking sleep more than anything else. Rest was not simply the absence of work, it was the reward for surviving another day together. As you settle onto a wooden bench beside the fire, listening to the peaceful sounds surrounding you, another question quietly begins to form. How could a house built almost entirely from wood remain so remarkably warm through the longest winters of the far north? That answer waits patiently, just beyond the dancing flames. The fire has not gone out. As the door settles shut behind you, the restless wind outside becomes little more than a distant murmur, softened by thick timber and layers of earth. Snow continues to drift across the roof without a sound, while inside the longhouse the warmth remains steady, almost unbelievably so. You expected smoke, cold drafts, and aching fingers. Instead, your hands slowly thaw as invisible currents of heat gather around the glowing hearth. For people of the Vikings' age, warmth was never an accident. It was something carefully understood, shaped through generations of observation. Every beam, every stone, every handful of packed earth played a quiet role in protecting the family from winters that could stretch for months. A poorly built house did more than waste fuel. It stole comfort, drained precious energy, and sometimes decided whether a family greeted the spring at all. The longhouse itself seemed to grow from the landscape. Towering oak posts formed its sturdy skeleton, while thick wooden planks created walls that resisted the bitter northern wind. Between the timbers, builders packed moss, clay, and animal hair into every narrow gap. These simple materials acted like nature's own insulation, trapping pockets of still air that slowed the escape of precious warmth. Above your head rests perhaps the cleverest feature of all, the roof. Rather than bare wooden shingles, many Viking longhouses carried heavy layers of birch bark beneath thick blankets of turf. Grass rooted itself into the soil, creating what looked almost like a living hillside. During summer, the roof remained cool beneath the sun. During winter, snow settled across it like yet another insulating blanket, quietly helping the house keep its heat while icy winds swept overhead. Outside, winter fought endlessly against the walls. Inside, it rarely won. Your eyes wander toward the center of the room, where the hearth burns with patient confidence. It is not hidden inside a modern fireplace. Instead, the fire rests openly upon a bed of carefully arranged stones running down the middle of the longhouse. Flames rise gently, sending warmth in every direction while smoke curls upward toward openings high along the roof. The smoke does not disappear all at once. Some of it lingers beneath the rafters before slowly finding its way outside. To modern visitors, that might sound uncomfortable. Yet the lingering smoke carried unexpected advantages. It discouraged insects from nesting in the timber, helped preserve wooden beams against moisture, and even dried hanging meat suspended high above the fire. Nothing inside the house performed only a single task. The warmth itself moved with surprising intelligence. As the fire heated the air, it drifted upward before cooling near the roof and gently circling back toward the floor. The long shape of the building encouraged slow currents that spread warmth throughout the living space rather than trapping it in one corner. Families instinctively arranged their daily lives around these invisible rivers of heat. Closer to the hearth sat the oldest family members, whose bones welcomed every degree of warmth. Children wandered between the benches, laughing softly before curling beside parents when sleep approached. Guests were offered places where the fire could best chase away the cold carried in from outside. Even the animals played their part. During the harshest winters, goats, sheep, or smaller livestock sometimes sheltered within sections of the longhouse or adjoining spaces. Their body heat added just enough warmth to make a quiet difference through long freezing nights. It may not sound glamorous, but survival rarely depended upon glamour. It depended upon using every available gift wisely. As evening deepens, someone quietly adds another log to the fire. No one rushes. There is no frantic effort to raise the temperature higher and higher. The goal is balance, not excess. The warmth is gentle, constant, almost embracing. It asks nothing from you except that you relax into it. Perhaps that steady rhythm explains something many of us have forgotten. Modern homes often chase perfect temperatures with machines that hum endlessly through the night, warming one moment and cooling the next. Here, comfort comes more slowly, carried by wood, earth, glowing embers, and patient craftsmanship. The body adjusts naturally, almost without noticing, while the mind gradually releases the tension gathered throughout the day. The fire continues its quiet conversation with the room. Shadows sway gently across carved pillars. The scent of burning pine lingers in the air, mingling with fresh wool and drying herbs. Beyond the sturdy walls, the frozen world remains vast and silent, but it no longer feels threatening. Wrapped inside this carefully crafted shelter, you begin to understand that warmth was never merely about surviving winter. It created a feeling of safety, and once a person truly felt safe, sleep could arrive without resistance. Soon, as blankets are unfolded and the evening meal comes to an end, your attention drifts toward another quiet mystery waiting beside the sleeping benches. The remarkably simple wool blankets that kept Viking families comfortable through even the longest northern nights. The warmth of the fire settles gently into the room, but as the evening grows older, another quiet ritual begins. Without a word, hands reach toward folded bundles resting inside wooden chests along the walls. Heavy blankets are lifted carefully, shaken once, then spread across sleeping benches with practiced ease. The sound is almost inaudible, a soft rustle of thick wool filling the longhouse as naturally as the crackling fire. If comfort had a language during the Vikings' age, it was spoken through wool. Long before synthetic fabrics, electric blankets, or insulated duvets, Viking families relied upon something remarkably simple: sheep. Their quiet companions grazing on windswept hillsides provided one of the greatest luxuries the North could offer. Warmth that stayed with you through the longest winter nights. To modern eyes, a wool blanket may seem ordinary. To a Viking family, it represented months of careful work, patience, and skill. The journey began long before winter arrived. During spring and early summer, sheep were sheared with iron blades, their thick fleece gathered into large bundles. But raw wool was far from ready. It had to be cleaned by hand, removing dirt, dried grass, and tangled fibers. Women, children, and elderly family members often shared this peaceful work together, sitting outdoors beneath the gentle summer sun while conversations drifted as slowly as the nearby streams. Once cleaned, the wool was combed into soft, even strands. Then came spinning. An elderly grandmother sits near the fire now, her fingers moving almost effortlessly around a wooden spindle. She hardly looks at her hands. Years of practice have turned the movement into quiet instinct. The spindle twists, the fibers stretch, and loose wool slowly becomes strong thread. There is something deeply calming about the rhythm. Twist, pull, twist again. The motion seems to slow the entire room. The thread is later woven on upright looms, where patient hands transform countless strands into thick cloth. It is careful work that cannot be hurried. Every finished blanket carries hours upon hours of unseen effort woven into every fiber. Perhaps that is why these blankets were treated with such care. They were not simply possessions, they were family treasures, Some were handed from parents to children, repaired again and again instead of being discarded. Small patches, carefully stitched over worn places, quietly told stories of countless winters already survived. The wool itself possessed remarkable qualities. Unlike many fabrics today, it trapped tiny pockets of air between its fibers. Those invisible spaces acted like natural insulation, holding body heat close while allowing moisture to escape. Even if a blanket became slightly damp from melting snow or humid air, it continued providing warmth. For people living beside icy seas and endless winter forests, that simple ability mattered enormously. As night deepens, several children disappear beneath layers of thick woven blankets. Only smiling faces remain visible. Nearby, an older man pulls a wool cloak over his shoulders before settling onto a wooden sleeping platform. The cloak that protected him outdoors during daylight now becomes an extra blanket through the night. Clothing and bedding often work together, each serving multiple purposes throughout the changing seasons. Animal furs sometimes rested above the wool, soft sheepskins, goatskins, occasionally the valuable pelts of foxes or bears, owned by wealthier families or successful hunters. Yet beneath those furs, it was usually the wool doing the quiet work of holding warmth close to sleeping bodies. The scent is comforting. Clean wool carries the faint smell of grass, earth, and smoke gathered over many seasons. It blends naturally with the aroma of pine logs burning in the hearth until the entire longhouse feels wrapped inside one great blanket of warmth. There are no bright electric lights delaying bedtime, no glowing screens keeping tired minds awake, only firelight dancing gently across woven fabrics that generations created with extraordinary patience. As you watch the family settle for the evening, another realization slowly emerges. These blankets offered more than protection from the cold. They carried familiarity. A child falling asleep beneath the same woven cover year after year would recognize its texture instantly. An elderly woman could trace repairs she herself stitched decades earlier. The blankets became quiet companions through births, illnesses, celebrations, harsh winters, and peaceful nights alike. Comfort was woven into memory itself. Outside, the wind presses softly against the timber walls. Inside, nobody seems concerned. Wrapped beneath layers of carefully crafted wool, the family drifts closer to sleep, one peaceful breath at a time. The fire continues glowing steadily nearby, adding its gentle warmth to blankets already doing their silent work. You begin to understand why travelers entering these homes often spoke of feeling unexpectedly comfortable despite the frozen wilderness outside. It was never one single thing, not the fire alone, not the walls, not the roof. It was every small detail working together, quietly, patiently, naturally. As the last blanket is folded around the youngest child, someone places another piece of birch into the glowing embers. The flames rise softly. Their golden light reaches across the sleeping platforms, inviting everyone just a little closer. Tonight, no place in the longhouse feels more welcoming than the space beside the hearth itself, where the heart of every Viking home continues to burn long after the stars have filled the northern sky. The blankets have been tucked into place. The conversations that quietly filled the longhouse only moments ago begin to fade, one voice after another, until they become little more than gentle whispers carried through the warm air. Outside, winter continues its endless journey across the frozen countryside, but inside, another presence quietly takes command of the night. The hearth. It has been the silent center of this home since dawn, warming meals, drying clothes, illuminating work, and gathering everyone beneath its comforting glow. Yet now, as sleep approaches, its purpose changes once again. It becomes the guardian of the night. The flames no longer leap as they did during the evening meal. Instead, Someone carefully rearranges the burning logs with a long wooden poker, spreading glowing embers across the bed of stones. A few fresh pieces of birch are added, not to create a roaring blaze, but to encourage a slow, steady burn that will last for hours. This is a fire prepared for sleeping. Too much heat would make the room uncomfortable. Too little would invite the creeping cold back inside. Finding the balance is a quiet skill, learned not from books, but from years of living through northern winters. An older member of the household kneels beside the fire one final time before bed. His movements are calm and deliberate. He studies the glowing coals with experienced eyes. Almost as if reading a familiar language hidden within the embers, he knows exactly how the fire will behave, which logs burn slowly, which wood releases the most warmth, how much air should reach the coals through the carefully arranged stones. Nothing is left to chance. The fire is trusted, but always respected. You settle yourself onto a sleeping platform near the hearth. Immediately, you notice something unexpected. The warmth is gentle. It is not the sharp burst of heat from a modern radiator or heater. Instead, it rises slowly, wrapping around you with quiet patience. Every few moments, another soft crack echoes through the room as a log settles deeper into the glowing bed of embers. The sound becomes strangely comforting. Crack, a gentle hiss, the faint sigh of drifting smoke. Each sound arrives with long stretches of silence between them. Those silences matter. Modern nights are often crowded with humming appliances, distant traffic, buzzing electronics, and glowing notifications that quietly compete for our attention. Here, silence is allowed to exist. The small sounds of the fire become gentle companions rather than interruptions. Above, smoke curls lazily toward the roof vents. The scent of burning birch fills the air with its sweet, earthy fragrance. Mixed with dried herbs hanging from the beams and the clean smell of wool blankets, the longhouse carries an aroma unlike anything found in modern homes. It smells alive, not polished, not artificial, simply lived in. As your eyes adjust to the dim light, you notice how the flames paint the room. Carved wooden pillars seem to move as shadows dance across them. Woven baskets cast delicate patterns onto the floor. Sleeping faces glow softly for a moment before fading back into darkness as the fire shifts again. Nothing remains completely still, yet nothing feels restless. The movement itself becomes soothing. Near the hearth, the family dog lifts its head, listens briefly to the wind outside, then curls tighter against the warmth. A child murmurs softly in sleep before settling once more beneath thick wool blankets. Somewhere across the room, someone exhales deeply, already dreaming. No one fears the darkness. Darkness is familiar here. It arrives every evening without surprise, bringing not anxiety, but permission to rest. The fire replaces the setting sun as the final source of light, gently guiding tired eyes towards sleep instead of resisting it. Outside, snow continues falling. It gathers silently across the turf roof, adding another layer of natural insulation. Occasionally, a stronger gust of wind brushes against the wooden walls, reminding everyone that the frozen world still waits beyond the doorway. But the longhouse answers with quiet confidence. Its thick timbers do not groan with panic. The hearth does not falter. The warmth remains. Perhaps that constancy offered something deeper than physical comfort. It offered reassurance. Every glowing ember whispered the same simple promise. You are safe tonight. For families living through unpredictable winters, that promise carried extraordinary power. Worries about tomorrow's weather, next season's harvest, or distant voyages could wait until sunrise. Night belonged to rest. As your breathing slows, you begin to notice how naturally your own thoughts become quieter. There is no clock reminding you how late it is. No bright light convincing your mind that the day should continue, only darkness, warmth, and the steady pulse of the fire. Time itself seems to soften, hours lose their sharp edges, the night becomes something to experience rather than something to measure. Eventually, even the flames shrink lower, becoming a glowing sea of crimson embers beneath a thin veil of ash. Their gentle light still reaches every sleeping bench, never fully disappearing. The hearth watches over the longhouse until morning, and somewhere within its steady glow, another quiet truth begins to reveal itself. Perhaps peaceful sleep was never created by perfect beds or expensive comforts. Perhaps it began with something far simpler, a place where people felt protected enough to close their eyes. As the embers breathe softly through the darkness, your attention drifts toward the wooden sleeping platforms surrounding the fire. They appear simple, almost too simple, yet they carried generations through countless peaceful nights. Soon, you will discover what Viking beds were really like. The embers continue glowing softly through the darkness. Their warmth reaches the sleeping platforms that line both sides of the longhouse, revealing shapes that look surprisingly simple. No carved headboards, no towering mattresses, no piles of decorative cushions. Just wooden frames built close to the walls, sturdy enough to survive decades of use. At first glance, they seem almost uncomfortable, yet appearances can be deceiving. As you move closer, you discover that a Viking bed was not merely a hard wooden bench. Beneath the blankets lies a carefully layered arrangement designed to keep sleepers warm, dry, and protected from the cold creeping up through the floor. The wooden platform forms only the beginning. On top rests a thick mattress stuffed with straw, hay, dried moss, or soft reeds gathered during the warmer months. Families often refreshed the filling before winter, replacing old material with cleaner, springier bedding that trapped air and added insulation. The scent of dried grass still lingers faintly beneath the wool blankets, carrying a memory of summer fields into the heart of winter. Above the mattress come the woolen layers you saw earlier. Then, for additional warmth, sheepskins or animal furs are spread across the top. The combination creates a bed that is firmer than anything most modern people would choose, yet far softer than bare wood. After a long day of walking, rowing, weaving, chopping wood, or tending animals, that firmness likely felt less like a hardship and more like welcome support. A young boy climbs onto one of the platforms nearby. He kicks off his boots, pulls a wool blanket over his shoulders, and curls naturally into a sleeping position. There is no tossing from side to side, no searching for the perfect angle. Within moments, his breathing begins to slow. His body already knows this place. That familiarity mattered. Viking beds were not constantly replaced or redesigned. A person might sleep on the same platform for years, perhaps even a lifetime. The mattress changed, the blankets were repaired, but the sleeping place itself remained a steady part of daily life. The body became accustomed to its shape, its firmness, and its warmth. Modern sleep often changes with every new mattress, pillow, or trend. Here, consistency was part of comfort. The arrangement of the beds also reveals something important about the longhouse itself. They stand close to the walls, leaving the center of the building open around the hearth. During winter, this allowed heat from the fire to circulate through the room while sleepers remained slightly elevated above the coldest air near the floor. Thick wool curtains or hanging fabrics could sometimes provide a little extra shelter from drafts. Nothing was wasted, even the space beneath the beds often served a purpose. Chests, tools, spare clothing, or food supplies might be stored there, keeping valuable belongings close and protected. You notice that not every sleeping place looks identical. The household leader may have a slightly larger platform. Elderly family members often sleep where warmth from the hearth reaches most easily. Children share spaces, nestled close beneath blankets that seem enormous compared with their small bodies. Comfort here is measured less by privacy and more by closeness. The fire crackles gently. A woman settles onto a platform opposite yours and folds a fur over her feet before lying down. An older man places his wool cloak beneath his head as a pillow. Simple solutions appear everywhere, shaped by necessity rather than luxury, and yet, watching the room grow still, it becomes difficult to call these beds primitive. They fit the world around them perfectly. The raised platforms protect against cold ground. The straw mattresses breathe naturally. The wool layers hold warmth without trapping moisture. The furs add softness where it matters most. Each part answers a specific problem created by northern winters. Outside, snow presses quietly against the longhouse walls. Inside, the sleeping platforms form a ring of quiet islands around the fading fire. One by one, the household drifts into sleep, wrapped in materials gathered from fields, forests, and animals that shared their landscape. There is a kind of honesty in these beds. Nothing is hidden, nothing pretends to be more than it is. Wood, straw, wool, fur, simple things arranged with care. As you settle onto your own platform, the firmness beneath you no longer feels strange. The warmth from the blankets rises slowly, and the scent of dried grass mixes with wood smoke in the dim air. Your shoulders relax almost without permission. Perhaps deep rest does not always require softness. Perhaps it requires trust. Trust that the bed will support you, that the fire will last until morning, and that the people sleeping nearby will be there when dawn returns. The longhouse grows quieter still. Only the hearth breathes now, glowing faintly between rows of sleeping figures. Yet one detail remains impossible to ignore. No one sleeps alone. The platforms stand close together, blankets overlap, and the warmth of one body helps warm the next. In this northern world, closeness is not an inconvenience, it is part of survival itself. And that quiet truth leads naturally into the next mystery waiting in the darkness: why entire families slept together. The beds stand side by side in the gentle glow of the dying fire. There are no separate bedrooms hidden behind wooden doors. No long hallways leading each person to a private space. The entire longhouse breathes as one living shelter, its warmth shared by everyone beneath its roof. As your eyes wander across the room, one quiet truth becomes impossible to ignore: no one is sleeping alone. A small child nestles between his parents, one tiny hand resting unconsciously on his mother's wool blanket. Nearby, two older brothers lie shoulder to shoulder beneath thick sheepskins, already asleep after a day spent gathering firewood beyond the village. An elderly grandmother sleeps only a few steps away, close enough that the youngest grandchildren could reach her with little more than a sleepy stretch. To modern eyes, such closeness may seem unusual. Today, many people expect privacy as naturally as fresh air. Separate bedrooms have become symbols of comfort, independence, and personal space. Yet for families of the Vikings' age, sharing sleep was not seen as a sacrifice. It was simply the way life was lived. Part of the reason was practical. Building a warm shelter large enough for several separate rooms demanded more timber, more labor, and more precious heat. Every wall added another surface through which warmth could escape into the frozen night. By sleeping together inside one open space, the family allowed the hearth to warm everyone more efficiently. Heat was shared, just as life itself was shared. Human bodies quietly contributed to the comfort of the room. Every sleeping person released gentle warmth beneath layers of wool blankets. One individual made little difference, 10 people together created something entirely different. Without realizing it, the family became part of the longhouse's natural heating system. It is a subtle detail, yet one that countless generations understood through experience rather than science. As the night deepens, the youngest child stirs. Before he fully wakes, his mother gently adjusts the blanket around his shoulders. She never opens her eyes completely. The movement is almost instinctive, practiced through years of caring for children during long northern winters. The child sighs softly and drifts back into peaceful sleep. Moments like this happen countless times throughout the Vikings' age. No glowing baby monitors, no electronic alarms, only parents sleeping close enough to hear every quiet breath. The arrangement also offered reassurance. The world beyond the longhouse could be unpredictable. Winter storms arrived without warning. Wolves occasionally wandered through distant forests. Fierce winds shook the timber walls, while endless darkness stretched across much of the cold season. Inside, however, nobody faced the night alone. Even in sleep, there was comfort in knowing familiar voices, familiar breathing, and familiar heartbeats surrounded you. Perhaps this sense of security reached deeper than people realized. Modern sleep researchers often speak about the nervous system's need to feel safe before entering truly restorative sleep. Although Viking families would never have used such words, they may have understood the feeling itself. Safety is easier to believe when loved ones rest only an arm's length away. The longhouse grows quieter still. You begin noticing another gentle rhythm. Breathing. One person exhales, another follows. Soon the entire room rises and falls, almost like waves rolling quietly upon a distant shore. The fire joins this rhythm with an occasional crackle. Outside, snow whispers against the turf roof. Together, these sounds create a natural lullaby no musician could carefully compose. There is remarkable comfort in belonging to something larger than yourself. For Viking children, this feeling began almost from birth. Infants slept near their mothers. Toddlers grew accustomed to falling asleep surrounded by parents, grandparents, siblings, and relatives. Nighttime never felt lonely because loneliness rarely entered the longhouse at all. Of course, sharing a sleeping space required patience. Someone might snore, another might rise briefly to tend the fire. A restless child could steal more than their fair share of the blanket. Yet these small inconveniences were accepted with quiet understanding. Daily life already demanded cooperation. Night simply continued the same pattern. As you look around the softly glowing room, you realize that the longhouse is doing far more than protecting people from winter. It is weaving relationships closer together. Every shared evening meal, every whispered conversation before sleep, every quiet morning greeting beside the hearth. These moments slowly shaped families. Across generations, the building itself became part of those memories. Perhaps that is why leaving home carried such emotional weight for young Vikings setting out on voyages. They were not only leaving a place, they were leaving the familiar warmth of sleeping beside those they loved. The embers sink lower now, bathing the room in a deep amber glow. Faces disappear beneath blankets. Only the gentle outline of sleeping figures remains visible. No one seems hurried. No one fights against the coming of sleep. The entire household surrenders to the night together, almost as naturally as birds settling into their nests at dusk. And somewhere within that quiet togetherness lies another forgotten lesson. Perhaps peaceful sleep grows strongest when life itself follows the steady rhythms of nature. Tomorrow, as the first pale light reaches the snowy hills beyond the village, you will discover a world without glowing screens, buzzing notifications, or artificial light, a world shaped entirely by the rising and setting of the sun. Morning has not arrived, yet something has already changed. The fire at the center of the longhouse has settled into a bed of glowing embers, casting only the gentlest light across the sleeping room. Shadows barely move now. The silence feels deeper than before, broken only by the quiet breathing of the family and the occasional whisper of wind brushing against the turf roof. There is no glowing clock counting the hours, no blinking light in the corner of the room, no phone vibrating beneath a pillow. The darkness is complete and remarkably peaceful. For people of the Vikings' age, night was not something to resist, it was something to enter. Today, darkness often feels unfamiliar. Cities shimmer long after sunset. Streets glow beneath electric lamps. Homes remain bright enough to read at midnight, while glowing screens convince the mind that the day is far from over. But here, 1,000 years ago, the setting sun quietly announced that the world was changing. As daylight faded beyond the mountains and frozen fjords, life inside the longhouse naturally slowed. Work became gentler. Voices softened. Hands finished one final task before drifting toward rest. Nobody had to remind themselves that bedtime was approaching. Nature had already done it. The human body has always listened carefully to light, even when we hardly notice, as the sky darkened each evening. Tiredness slowly arrived, not all at once, but like the gentle falling of snow. Eyes grew heavier. Conversations became shorter. Even children, so full of endless energy during daylight, gradually settled beneath their blankets without long arguments or endless distractions. The rhythm belonged to the earth itself. Imagine standing outside the longhouse just after sunset. The western horizon still holds a faint ribbon of pale gold, slowly dissolving into deep blue. Above you, countless stars begin appearing one by one, brighter than most modern people will ever experience. There are no distant cities washing out the heavens, only darkness and light exactly where nature intended it. The moon rises slowly over snow-covered hills. Its silver glow reflects across frozen streams and quiet forests until the entire landscape seems wrapped in soft blue light. The world does not disappear after sunset, it simply becomes quieter. Inside, the family notices none of this with urgency. The door remains closed, the hearth glows patiently. Someone finishes mending a wool glove by firelight before placing the needle carefully inside a wooden box. Another person whispers a final goodnight before lying down. There is no temptation to continue working for hours beneath artificial light. The night gently places limits on the day. Those limits become a gift. Without endless opportunities to remain awake, the body learns consistency. Sleep arrives at nearly the same time each evening, not because of strict schedules, but because sunrise and sunset rarely negotiate. Winter certainly changes the length of those nights. Some evenings seem endless beneath northern skies, while summer barely allows darkness to settle before dawn returns again. Yet Viking families adapted with surprising ease, adjusting their routines to the changing seasons rather than forcing every day to look exactly the same. Nature remained the clock. As you rest beside the fading embers, you notice something curious about your own thoughts. They have become slower. Without bright light stimulating your eyes, your attention drifts inward. The mind no longer jumps from one interruption to another. Instead, it wanders gently through quiet reflections before gradually becoming still. The fire helps. Its warm glow flickers softly, never harsh enough to trick the brain into believing that morning has arrived. Every movement of the flames grows smaller until only glowing coals remain beneath a blanket of pale ash. Some historians believe this gentle transition from light to darkness played an important role in healthy sleep throughout the Vikings' age. There was no sudden switch, no sharp contrast, only a gradual fading of the day. Even the sounds followed this rhythm. During daylight, axes struck wood, animals called across nearby fields. Children laughed between the houses, now only the occasional settling of timber, a distant owl beyond the walls. The quiet sigh of someone turning beneath a wool blanket, silence itself became part of the evening ritual. You begin to wonder whether modern life has simply forgotten how darkness is meant to feel, not frightening, not empty, but deeply comforting, a space where the mind no longer needs to solve problems, answer messages, or chase tomorrow before today has even ended. The Vikings may never have spoken about sleep hygiene or circadian rhythms. They did not need those words. Their daily lives naturally followed patterns that generations had inherited from the land, the weather, and the turning of the seasons. Outside, the stars continue their silent journey across the northern sky. Inside, every sleeper seems carried along by the same invisible current, flowing effortlessly toward dawn. The first birds will not sing for several more hours. The fire will need fresh wood. The village will slowly awaken once again, but not yet. For now, the longhouse remains suspended between yesterday and tomorrow, resting peacefully within the deepest hours of the night. And when morning finally arrives, it will not begin with hurried footsteps or ringing alarms. It will begin much more gently, with the comforting aroma of a simple evening meal remembered, and the quiet traditions that always came before sleep. The stars still shimmer above the frozen hills, but let us quietly turn the clock back a few hours, before the blankets were unfolded, before the embers settled into their patient glow, before the longhouse surrendered itself to sleep. There was one final gathering that gently brought the entire day to its close, the evening meal, not a hurried bite eaten while standing, not a distraction shared with glowing screens, but a slow return to one another. As the pale winter sun slipped below the horizon, the longhouse gradually filled with familiar scents. Smoke curled lazily upward from the hearth while an iron cooking pot hung above the glowing fire, its contents bubbling softly with the steady rhythm of the flames. Someone lifted the heavy wooden lid. Immediately, warm steam drifted through the room. It carried the comforting aroma of barley, root vegetables, onions, herbs, and tender pieces of fish caught earlier that day. On fortunate evenings, there might also be lamb, goat, or venison, carefully preserved from previous hunts. The meal was rarely extravagant, yet it was deeply satisfying. For families of the Vikings' age, food represented far more than nourishment. It marked the quiet ending of labor. The fields had been tended, the fishing nets gathered, the animals fed, the fire prepared. Now, there was finally time to sit together. Wooden bowls were passed from hand to hand. No two were exactly alike. Some carried small carved patterns along their rims, worn smooth after years of daily use. Others had tiny cracks repaired with careful craftsmanship, too valuable to discard simply because time had left its mark. Simple wooden spoons rested beside them. Nothing gleamed with polished silver, nothing needed to. A young girl carefully carries fresh bread from a nearby shelf. The loaf is dark, dense, and fragrant, baked from barley or rye rather than soft white flour. She tears it into pieces and quietly shares it with those seated nearest the hearth. Nobody rushes to eat. The pace feels almost unfamiliar. Conversation flows naturally between slow bites. Someone recalls an amusing moment from the day's work. An elderly grandfather tells a story he has likely told many times before, yet nobody seems impatient to hear it again. A child listens with wide eyes while absent-mindedly dipping bread into warm stew. The room fills with gentle laughter, not loud, not overwhelming, simply enough to remind everyone that they belong here. The warmth of the meal spreads slowly through tired bodies. After hours spent outdoors in cold northern air, even a modest bowl of hot stew could feel wonderfully comforting. Warm food gently raised body temperature while providing the energy needed to endure another long winter night. Modern nutritionists often speak about balanced meals. The Vikings simply understood through experience which food sustained them: barley porridge, fresh fish, root vegetables stored through the winter, fermented dairy, nuts, berries gathered during summer and carefully preserved. Every season quietly contributed to the table. The meal itself reflected the landscape surrounding the village. Nothing traveled across oceans, nothing arrived inside colorful packages. Almost everything resting inside those wooden bowls had come from nearby fields, forests, rivers, or coastlines familiar to the family. Eating became another way of remaining connected to nature. As the bowls gradually emptied, nobody immediately stood up. Instead, they lingered. The fire crackled softly. Someone reached for a drinking horn filled with fresh water or mild ale brewed with care. Another quietly added another piece of wood to the hearth while listening to the conversation continue. There was no pressure to hurry toward the next appointment. Evening itself became an important part of the day. You notice something else: nobody eats alone. Even visitors passing through the village often found themselves welcomed to the fire, offered food before questions were asked. Hospitality held deep meaning throughout much of the Vikings' age. A shared meal created trust, strengthened friendships, and reminded everyone that survival in the north often depended upon cooperation. The youngest children begin rubbing their eyes, the oldest smile knowingly. The warmth of the food, combined with the soft glow of the hearth, gently invites sleep long before anyone lies down. Without realizing it, the entire household has begun preparing for rest, not through strict bedtime rituals, but through peaceful habits repeated across countless generations. The bowls are eventually stacked neatly beside the hearth, wooden spoons are rinsed, the great cooking pot remains suspended above fading embers, still releasing the faint aroma of herbs and barley into the warm air. Nobody speaks very loudly now. The room has changed. The lively conversations of supper have quietly become softer reflections. Outside, darkness has fully settled across the snow-covered landscape. The stars shine brighter than ever above the silent forests, while inside, the longhouse glows like a tiny island of warmth surrounded by endless winter. Your own body begins responding almost without thought. A satisfying meal, a warm fire, familiar voices, gentle silence. One by one, they encourage tired eyes to grow heavier. Perhaps this was another forgotten secret. Sleep did not begin the moment someone climbed into bed. It began hours earlier, with simple food, shared company, and an evening allowed to unfold without hurry. As the last bowl is carefully placed aside and the family quietly reaches for their blankets, another question slowly rises from the glowing hearth. How did these peaceful evenings change when winter itself seemed determined never to end, when darkness stretched across nearly the entire day, and the rhythm of sleep followed the changing seasons of the far north? The last wooden bowl has been carefully set aside, the fire burns lower now, and the longhouse grows quieter with every passing moment. Outside, the frozen world seems almost suspended in time. Snowflakes drift lazily through the darkness, disappearing into the endless white that already blankets the hills, the forests, and the narrow paths between distant farms. Inside, everyone prepares for another peaceful night. But winter changes everything. For people of the Vikings' age, the seasons were not simply different kinds of weather. They shaped nearly every part of life, including something as ordinary and as essential as sleep. Imagine waking in the middle of winter. Not because of an alarm, not because sunlight fills the room, but because the fire needs tending. Beyond the walls of the longhouse, the sun has not yet appeared. In fact, during the northernmost winters, daylight may last only a handful of hours before fading once again into twilight. The mornings arrive slowly, wrapped in pale blue light that barely warms the frozen earth before evening quietly returns. Time itself begins to feel different. Days seem shorter, nights stretch endlessly, and with those long nights comes something modern life rarely allows: permission to rest. Winter invited a slower rhythm. Without fields to harvest or ships to launch across icy seas, many outdoor tasks naturally became less demanding. The frantic pace of summer faded into memory, replaced by quieter work carried out inside the shelter of the longhouse. Hands remained busy, but bodies were no longer rushing from sunrise until sunset. Women spun wool beside the hearth, men repaired fishing nets, carved wooden tools, or sharpened iron blades for the coming spring. Children listened to stories while practicing simple crafts beneath the warm glow of the fire. The work continued. Yet it moved with remarkable patience. This slower pace carried into the night. When darkness arrived in the late afternoon, nobody felt compelled to force the day to continue. The longhouse gradually shifted toward rest almost as naturally as a forest settling beneath fresh snow. Some historians believe that many people during the Vikings' age may have slept longer during winter than they did in summer. It was not laziness, it was adaptation. The human body responds to changing daylight far more deeply than most of us realize. With fewer hours of sunlight reaching the eyes, tiredness often arrived earlier, encouraging longer periods of sleep and quiet reflection. Nature quietly adjusted the schedule. No meetings waited at dawn. No glowing clocks insisted every day must begin at exactly the same hour regardless of the season. The land itself became the calendar. As you lie beneath your wool blankets, you imagine the sounds outside. Snow softens almost everything. Footsteps become muffled. The wind loses its sharp edge beneath thick drifts. Even the forests seem quieter, as though the trees themselves are sleeping. That silence enters the longhouse. The fire becomes the loudest voice in the room. A single log settles into glowing embers. Someone exhales deeply. A child turns beneath a blanket before becoming still once more. Nothing asks the mind to remain alert. Winter has gently lowered the volume of the entire world. Of course, the season also brought challenges. Food supplies had to last until spring. Livestock required careful attention. Blizzards sometimes trapped families indoors for days, even weeks. The frozen landscape could quickly become dangerous for anyone traveling too far from home. Yet those hardships also strengthened the importance of the evenings you have already experienced. The warm meal, the glowing hearth, the shared blankets, the familiar company. Each comfort became more precious because winter reminded people how harsh the world beyond the walls could truly be. There is another quiet change you begin to notice: dreams. When nights grow longer, it often feels as though dreams have more room to unfold. Perhaps that is only imagination, or perhaps generations of Vikings spent these extended winter nights wandering through vivid landscapes of memory, hope, and mystery while the snow quietly gathered above the turf roof. No one can truly know, but the stories passed down across centuries suggest that winter nights were often seen as a time when the unseen world felt just a little closer. For now, though, the longhouse remains wonderfully ordinary. Warmth surrounds every sleeping platform. The fire glows with quiet determination. Outside, frost slowly paints delicate patterns across the doorway. Inside, breathing rises and falls with peaceful regularity. The family has learned not to fight the season. Instead, they move with it. Perhaps that is the greatest lesson winter offered. Not every month must be equally productive. Not every day must follow the same rigid schedule. Sometimes the wisest thing a person can do is slow down, sleep a little longer, and trust that spring will arrive in its own time. The embers grow softer still, their crimson light barely touching the wooden beams above. Beyond them, the darkness feels calm rather than empty. Soon, the village will awaken to another cold morning, another quiet day of patient work, another peaceful evening beside the hearth. And through all of it, one truth quietly remains. The quality of Viking sleep was shaped not only by warm homes or thick blankets, but by the rhythm of each day itself. Tomorrow, you will step outside the longhouse once more, not to face battle or adventure, but to discover how the steady work of ordinary life quietly prepared both body and mind for the deepest kind of rest. The winter morning arrives slowly, not with a sudden burst of noise, but with a gradual return of light. A faint grey glow slips across the snowy landscape, touching the roof of the longhouse before reaching the small openings near the walls. Inside, the fire is carefully brought back to life, and one by one, sleeping figures begin to stir beneath their heavy wool blankets. There is no rush. The day begins when the world is ready. A person stretches slowly, feeling the warmth leave the comfortable embrace of the bedding. The body remembers yesterday's efforts, the walk through frozen fields, the carrying of supplies, the endless small tasks that filled the hours before night arrived. For people of the Vikings' age, sleep was not separated from daily life. The quality of the night was connected to everything that happened during the day. Their bodies followed a simple pattern: movement, effort, recovery, then movement again. Long before modern gyms, fitness plans, and carefully scheduled exercise routines, daily survival naturally kept people active. The work required to maintain a household was demanding, but it was also regular. The body was constantly reminded when to use energy and when to rest. As the longhouse awakens, the day's tasks begin. Someone steps outside to gather firewood. The cold air immediately surrounds him, sharp and refreshing. Each piece of wood carried back to the house represents another warm evening beside the hearth. The work is not performed for exercise, but the body grows stronger through the simple repetition of necessary tasks. Nearby, another family member checks supplies stored for the winter months. Heavy containers must be moved, tools need repairing, animals require attention, clothing must be cleaned and mended. None of these activities seem extraordinary when viewed individually, but together, they create a lifestyle built around constant, gentle movement. The body rarely remains still for long. During warmer seasons, the demands increase even further. Fields must be prepared, crops planted, boats repaired, fishing nets woven, animals guided across open land. The work changes with the seasons, but the rhythm remains. A person spends energy during daylight and allows the body to recover when darkness returns. There is something deeply natural about this balance. Today, many people spend long hours sitting while the mind remains endlessly active. The body may be resting in a chair, yet the thoughts continue racing. Stress follows people into the evening, making it difficult to truly separate the day from the night. Inside the Viking village, the separation was clearer. When the day's physical effort ended, the body had already received a powerful message. It was time to recover. You can see this in the longhouse as evening approaches. A man who spent hours carrying supplies lowers himself onto the wooden bench near the hearth. His hands are tired, but his expression is peaceful. A woman who spent the afternoon weaving wool rests her shoulders while watching the flames. Children who played outside through the cold day fall asleep quickly once they are beneath their blankets. Their bodies understand exhaustion, not the restless exhaustion created by endless worry, but the satisfying tiredness that comes after meaningful effort. That difference matters. The Vikings did not chase exhaustion for its own sake. They simply lived in a way where movement had purpose. Every task connected to something real. A repaired tool meant future work would be easier. A gathered bundle of firewood meant warmth through another night. A prepared meal meant strength for another morning. The effort of the day carried a sense of achievement into the evening, perhaps that helped quiet the mind. When a person knows they have contributed something valuable, there is a certain peace that follows. The day feels complete. Nothing important remains unfinished. As darkness returns, the village begins its familiar transition toward rest. The same hands that worked outdoors now hold warm wooden bowls near the fire. The same feet that walked through snow now rest beneath wool blankets. The same body that carried the weight of the day now accepts the comfort of the night. Everything is connected. The longhouse grows quiet again. Outside, the landscape remains vast and demanding. Inside, the people who live here have followed the same ancient pattern their ancestors understood: work while the sun allows, rest when darkness arrives, trust the rhythm of the world around you. The final piece of firewood settles into the hearth, releasing a gentle wave of warmth across the room. You begin to see that Viking sleep was never created by one magical secret. It came from countless small choices woven into everyday life: the home, the food, the blankets, the darkness, the movement. All of them work together like threads in the same fabric, and yet, there is still one challenge waiting beyond these peaceful walls. The north was not always calm. Some nights brought violent winds, heavy snow, and storms powerful enough to shake even the strongest longhouses. How did Viking families sleep when the wilderness outside seemed determined to remind them of its strength? The answer waits in the sound of the winter wind. The wind begins before midnight. At first, it is only a distant whisper moving through the dark forests beyond the village. A soft sound passing between frozen trees, almost easy to ignore. But slowly, the whisper grows stronger. The longhouse listens. The wooden beams creak gently. The turf roof catches the first heavy drops of freezing rain. Outside, the peaceful winter landscape has transformed. Snow swirls across the open fields, hiding familiar paths beneath a blanket of white. The sea beyond the village becomes restless, its waves crashing against the rocky shoreline beneath a sky filled with heavy clouds. This is the other side of the northern world, the world that tested every shelter, every family, and every person who called Scandinavia home during the Vikings' age. Yet inside the longhouse, the family sleeps, or at least, they try to, because storms were not rare visitors, they were part of life. A Viking household could not choose perfect weather before bedtime. There were no forecasts announcing approaching storms, no machines adjusting the temperature, no modern buildings designed to block every sound from nature. Instead, people learned to live alongside the wilderness. The storm became another voice in the night. A child wakes briefly as a powerful gust pushes against the walls, his eyes open in the dim glow of the hearth. For a moment, he listens. The wind sounds enormous, almost like something moving across the roof, but then he feels the warmth beside him, the familiar weight of the wool blanket, the quiet breathing of his family nearby, the steady glow of the fire. Slowly, his fear disappears. He closes his eyes again. This simple moment reveals something important about Viking homes. The longhouse was not designed to make nature disappear. It was designed to help people feel protected while nature continued outside. The sounds of the storm remained. The wind still howled, the snow still fell. But the walls created a boundary between danger and comfort. The thick timber structure absorbed much of the force. The low, heavy roof resisted powerful winds. The turf covering added weight and stability, helping the building remain firmly connected to the earth. The house did not fight the storm, it endured it. That difference mattered. A modern person might think of comfort as complete separation from the outside world, but for Viking families, Comfort often came from knowing exactly where they stood within that world. They could hear the storm, they could feel the cold, and because of that, they understood the warmth of shelter even more deeply. The hearth becomes the center of attention during difficult nights. Someone carefully rises to adjust the fire, adding another piece of wood before returning beneath the blankets. The movement is quiet and familiar, repeated countless times across generations. The flames answer with a soft crackle, the room brightens for a moment, then settles again. Outside, the storm continues its journey across the frozen landscape. Inside, another kind of rhythm begins, the storm's deep roaring, the fire's gentle popping, the slow breathing of sleeping families. Together, these sounds create an unusual kind of peace. There is something strangely comforting about hearing powerful weather while remaining safely sheltered. The contrast between the wild world outside and the protected world inside creates a feeling of deep security. Perhaps that is why many people throughout history found storms easier to endure when surrounded by others. A storm alone can feel endless. A storm shared becomes a memory. In the longhouse, stories were sometimes exchanged during especially severe weather. Older family members might describe storms they had survived years before. Children listened closely, learning that every winter eventually passed. The storm was temporary, the shelter was steady, the morning would return. Hours pass, the wind slowly weakens, snow continues falling, but its anger fades into silence. The longhouse remains standing, warm and familiar beneath the dark sky. The youngest children sleep deeply once again. The oldest members of the family rest beside the fading fire. Nobody needed to conquer the storm. They only needed to wait for it to pass. As dawn approaches, the first pale light begins to appear beyond the snowy horizon. The village outside has changed overnight. Paths have disappeared. Trees carry fresh layers of snow. The world looks untouched, but inside the longhouse, life continues. The same hearth, the same blankets, the same quiet morning beginning. Perhaps this was another reason Viking sleep could feel so peaceful. They trusted the places they lived. They understood the materials around them. They knew that even when the world became harsh, their homes had been shaped through generations of experience to protect them. The storm leaves behind a deeper silence than before. A silence that feels earned. And as the family slowly awakens, another part of this story begins to emerge. The youngest members of the household have spent the night exactly as their ancestors did, surrounded by warmth, darkness, and familiar voices. But what was it like for children growing up inside these longhouses? How did these early years shape their understanding of comfort, safety, and sleep? The answer begins with the smallest footsteps in the morning snow. The storm has finally passed. Morning arrives quietly over the village, leaving behind a world transformed by fresh snow. The paths between the houses have nearly disappeared. The wooden fences wear thick white coats, and the forests beyond the settlement stand silent beneath the weight of winter. Inside the longhouse, however, life is already beginning. A small pair of footsteps moves across the wooden floor. A child wakes before the adults, not because of an alarm, not because someone tells him it is time, but because the world around him is changing. The fire is being revived. The first light of morning is entering through the openings above. The familiar voices of family members are returning. For children growing up during the Vikings' age, the longhouse was not simply a place where they slept, it was their entire early world. It was where they learned, where they played, where they listened, where they discovered what it meant to belong. Modern childhood is often divided into different spaces. There are bedrooms, schools, playgrounds, and separate areas for work and rest. But inside a Viking longhouse, these boundaries were much less defined. A child could wake beside grandparents, eat breakfast near working adults, watch skilled hands create tools and clothing, then step outside to explore the surrounding landscape. Learning happened everywhere. There was no single classroom. The world itself became the teacher. A young child watches closely as his mother spins wool near the hearth. At first, the movement seems impossible to understand. The spindle turns, the fibers stretch, the thread appears almost magically from her hands. But slowly, the child begins copying the motions, not perfectly, not quickly, but little by little. Skills pass naturally from one generation to the next. Nearby, another child studies a wooden carving made by an older family member. The pattern may represent an animal, a story, or simply a beautiful shape created from imagination and patience. These small moments formed the foundation of life. Children were not separated from the activities of adults, they were welcomed into them. They learned by watching, by asking questions, by trying, and by making mistakes. Even bedtime became part of this shared experience. A child sleeping among family members absorbed the sounds and rhythms of the household. The crackling hearth. The quiet conversations before sleep. The footsteps of someone checking the fire during the night. These sounds became familiar from the earliest years of life. Comfort was not something children searched for. It was something they grew up knowing. Imagine a winter evening inside the longhouse. A young girl lies beneath a wool blanket while her grandmother tells a story beside the hearth. The flames cast soft shadows across the wooden walls. Outside, darkness covers the village. The story may speak of distant ancestors, mysterious forests, great journeys, or the powerful forces believed to shape the world. The child listens, not because she must, because the night feels made for listening. Stories filled the long winter evenings, preserving memories and teaching lessons without feeling like formal instruction. Children learned courage, respect, patience, the importance of family, the meaning of hospitality. They learned that survival was never achieved alone. The people around them were their greatest protection. This closeness shaped their relationship with sleep as well. A frightened child did not need to walk through a dark hallway searching for comfort. A worried child did not have to face the night alone. A familiar hand was always nearby. A familiar voice could always be heard. A warm place beneath shared blankets was always waiting. This environment created a powerful sense of security. Of course, childhood was not always easy. Viking children lived in a world where responsibilities arrived early. They helped with daily tasks, learned practical skills, and understood that everyone contributed to the household, but their lives were not without joy. They played near the fields, they created games from simple objects, they explored forests and shorelines, they laughed around the same hearth where their ancestors had gathered for generations. Their world was smaller than ours in many ways, but perhaps it was also more connected. As evening returns, the same child who woke beside the fire now settles back into the familiar sleeping space. The blanket is pulled upward, the voices around him soften, the hearth glows. The longhouse becomes quiet once again. From childhood onward, night is associated with warmth, family, and belonging, not with isolation, not with endless stimulation, not with fear of being alone. The child closes his eyes. Surrounded by the sounds that have shaped his entire life, the fire, the wind, the breathing of loved ones, and somewhere between waking and dreaming, another mysterious part of Viking nighttime life begins to appear, because when the darkness arrived and dreams took hold, many Vikings believed the night was not completely empty. They believed unseen forces moved through it, and their dreams carried messages from a world beyond ordinary sight. The longhouse has become almost completely still, the voices have faded, the fire has lowered itself into a quiet glow, children sleep beneath wool blankets, elders rest near the warmth of the hearth, and the wooden beams above hold the memories of countless nights before this one. But sleep was never considered an empty space for many people of the Vikings' age. When the eyes closed and the world of daylight disappeared, another world was believed to open. A world of dreams, a world of mysteries, a world where the boundary between what could be seen and what could only be felt became much thinner. As you lie beside the fading fire, you imagine the thoughts that may have passed through the minds of those resting here centuries ago. What did they see when they dreamed? Did they revisit familiar valleys and frozen shores? Did they speak with ancestors who had passed away? Did they receive warnings, comfort, or glimpses of things yet to come? For Viking families, dreams could carry meaning far beyond simple nighttime images. They were often treated with curiosity and respect. A strange dream might be remembered for years. A repeated vision might become part of family conversations, a dream involving loved ones. Animals or powerful landscapes might be carefully considered, especially if it arrived during an important moment in life. The night was not viewed as a blank space, it was a doorway. The darkness surrounding the longhouse already carried mystery. Beyond the walls stretched enormous forests, endless seas, and mountains hidden beneath clouds. The northern landscape itself seemed filled with unseen forces. Storms arrived suddenly. The ocean could change from calm to dangerous within hours. The long winter night seemed almost endless. It was natural that people wondered what existed beyond what their eyes could see. Around the hearth, stories gave shape to those mysteries. Elders passed down tales of gods, spirits, heroes, and beings connected to the natural world. These stories were not simply entertainment before bedtime. They helped people understand their place within a vast and unpredictable universe. A grandmother sits beside the fire, her voice quiet and steady. Children listen beneath their blankets as she describes ancient stories passed from one generation to another. The flames move across her face, creating shadows that seem almost alive. The children do not interrupt. They are completely absorbed. The stories belong to the night. They belong beside the hearth. They belong in the moments when the world becomes quiet enough for imagination to grow. Among the beliefs of the Vikings' age were ideas about spirits connected to places, families, and unseen realms. Some traditions spoke of protective beings. Others warned of mysterious creatures that wandered through darkness. These beliefs reflected a deep connection with the environment. A forest was not simply a collection of trees, a mountain was not merely stone, a storm was not only wind and rain. The world was alive with meaning. This way of thinking changed how people experienced nighttime. Darkness was not simply the absence of light. It was a time when different parts of existence seemed closer together, yet these beliefs did not mean every night was filled with fear. In many ways, they added wonder. A person lying beneath a blanket beside a warm hearth could look into the darkness beyond the doorway and imagine a universe much larger than the walls around them. The unknown became something to respect, not something to constantly escape. Dreams also reflected everyday life. A farmer might dream of fields, a sailor might dream of waves, a parent might dream of protecting children. The mind carried memories, hopes, and worries into the sleeping world, creating stories from the experiences of the day. Even without understanding the science of dreams, Viking families recognized that the nighttime mind had its own mysterious language. Perhaps that is why quiet evenings mattered so much. The slower the day became, the more space the mind had to wander. Without endless distractions filling every moment, thoughts had time to settle. Memories could rise naturally. Imagination could move freely. The longhouse provided the perfect setting: darkness outside, warmth inside, the steady sound of the fire, the familiar presence of family nearby, a place where dreams could arrive gently. As the night continues, the last embers glow beneath a thin layer of ash, the sleeping figures remain motionless. Somewhere, someone dreams of a distant shore, someone else dreams of a familiar face, someone else simply rests in the quiet darkness. The spirits and stories of the Vikings may belong to another age, but the feeling behind them remains familiar: the desire to understand the night, the hope that dreams might carry meaning. The comfort of believing that even when we sleep, we are connected to something greater than ourselves. The fire slowly fades toward morning, but before the sun returns, there is another kind of sleep waiting to be understood, not the sleep of ordinary villagers after a long day, but the sleep of warriors, those who carried the weight of battle, returned home exhausted, and still needed to find peace beneath the same northern sky. The stories of Vikings often begin with the sea, with ships cutting through cold waves, with warriors standing beneath gray skies, with shields raised and distant shores approaching. But every journey eventually ended, every warrior who left home eventually returned, and when the noise of battle disappeared, when the weapons were placed aside and the longships rested quietly along the shore, there remained a very different question: how did these men recover? How did someone who had experienced fear, exhaustion, and danger find peace enough to sleep inside the longhouse, far away from the battlefield? The answer was not found in victory songs or heroic stories. It was found in ordinary things: warmth, food, rest, the familiar sounds of home. For people of the Vikings' age, warriors were not separate from the communities they protected. A man who carried a shield during conflict was also a father, a brother, a farmer, a craftsman, or a friend. When he returned, he stepped back into the same world where everyone else lived. The warrior became human again. Imagine a cold evening after a long journey. The wooden door opens, a figure appears in the entrance, carrying the marks of travel. His clothing smells of sea air and smoke. His steps are slower than before. The excitement of returning home is mixed with deep exhaustion. No great ceremony is needed. The family already knows. Someone brings warm food. Someone prepares a place beside the hearth. Someone quietly offers a blanket. The longhouse welcomes him back. Recovery begins long before sleep. The body first needs warmth. Cold muscles relax beside the fire. Hands that gripped weapons for hours finally become still. Shoulders that carried heavy shields slowly release their tension. The simple act of sitting among familiar faces becomes a powerful reminder that the danger has ended. The outside world can wait. Tonight, the warrior is home. The meal that follows is simple but important. A tired body needs energy after difficult journeys and physical effort. A bowl of warm stew, fresh bread, and drink shared with family provided more than nourishment. It represented return, a connection between the person who left and the person who came back. As the evening continues, conversations are often quieter than people might expect. Not every experience needed to be described. Sometimes silence carried its own meaning. A warrior sitting near the hearth did not always need words. The familiar sounds of the longhouse could say enough: the crackling fire, the voices of loved ones, the movement of ordinary life continuing around him. These things reminded him that there was more to existence than conflict. This transition mattered. Modern understanding of stress and recovery recognizes that the mind needs signals of safety after periods of intense pressure. Although Viking families did not use such language, they understood the importance of returning to a place where the body could finally relax. The longhouse provided that place. The same walls that protected families from storms also protected returning warriors from the emotional weight of their experiences. The same hearth that cooked meals also became a place where tired minds could settle. The same blankets that warmed children also offered comfort to those who had traveled far from home. Night arrived slowly. A warrior removes his outer clothing and places it beside the sleeping platform. The heavy equipment that defined him outside now rests silently against the wall. The shield, the tools, the signs of conflict, they no longer matter tonight. He lies beneath wool blankets near the warmth of the fire. Around him, the longhouse continues its familiar rhythm. Someone turns in sleep, a child breathes softly, the flames move gently across the wooden beams. The world that demanded strength during the day now allows weakness, and perhaps that was one of the greatest forms of healing, not pretending exhaustion did not exist, not pretending fear had no effect, but having a place where those burdens could finally be set down. The warrior closes his eyes. Tomorrow may bring new challenges, new journeys, new responsibilities, but tonight belongs only to rest. Outside, the northern darkness stretches across the land. Inside, the longhouse remains a sanctuary of warmth and memory. The same peaceful sleep that comforted farmers and families now welcomes those who had faced danger beyond the horizon, because beneath the armor, beneath the stories, beneath the legends, there was always a person who needed the same simple thing everyone needs, a safe place to rest. And as the warrior disappears into dreams beside the glowing hearth, the entire village begins to reveal another hidden truth. Peaceful sleep was not only created inside the home, it was also created by the quiet life surrounding it, the village itself becoming part of the nighttime lullaby. The warrior sleeps, the storm has passed, the fire has settled into a steady glow, and beyond the walls of the longhouse, an entire village rests beneath the northern sky. From a distance, the settlement appears almost empty, no voices calling across the paths, no footsteps rushing between buildings, no movement except the occasional flicker of firelight behind wooden walls. But this silence is not the silence of abandonment. It is the silence of a community at peace. During the Vikings' age, village nights followed a rhythm created over generations. Every person, every animal, every home became part of a larger pattern that continued long after the day's work was finished. The village did not truly stop, it simply became quieter. Outside the longhouse, the final traces of evening disappear. A farmer checks the animals one last time before returning inside. A craftsperson places unfinished work safely away until morning. A family member carries a small bucket of water toward the doorway, careful not to disturb those already sleeping. These movements are slow, purposeful, almost invisible. The night belongs to gentle actions. You step outside the longhouse for a moment. The cold air immediately touches your face. Above, the sky stretches endlessly across the darkness. Stars shine with a brightness rarely seen in the modern world. Without the glow of distant cities, the heavens appear enormous, almost close enough to reach. The village rests beneath them. Nearby homes sit quietly beside one another, their turf roofs blending into the snowy landscape. Thin lines of smoke rise from chimneys and roof openings, disappearing into the cold air above. Each home holds its own small world. Inside one, a family sleeps around a fading hearth. Inside another, someone whispers a final conversation before turning toward rest. Inside another, an elderly person wakes briefly, listens to the familiar sounds of the house, then peacefully closes their eyes again. Every building has its own rhythm, yet together, they create something larger, a sleeping village. The concept may feel strange today. Modern neighborhoods often remain active throughout the night. Lights shine from windows. Vehicles pass along roads. Machines continue working long after people have gone to bed, but a Viking village experienced darkness differently. Night created a natural boundary, a time when most activity slowed and the community turned inward. The sounds changed completely. During the day, the village carried the noises of survival, axes striking wood, animals moving, voices calling, footsteps crossing frozen ground. At night, those sounds disappeared. They were replaced by something much softer: the crackle of hearth fires, the movement of wind through wooden walls, the distant sound of waves along the shore, the quiet breathing of sleeping families. These sounds were familiar. And familiarity creates comfort. A person sleeping in such a village was never completely separated from the world around them. They could hear life continuing nearby, even while their own body rested. Perhaps that connection helped create a deeper sense of security. You were not alone in the darkness. The entire village was resting with you. Even the animals followed this rhythm. Horses stood quietly in their shelters. Dogs curled near warm spaces. Livestock settled into the cold night, protected as much as possible from the harsh northern weather. Their presence added another layer of life to the village silence. Occasionally, a person would wake. Maybe the fire needed attention. Maybe the wind had changed. Maybe a child needed comfort. But these interruptions were not viewed as failures of sleep. They were simply part of living within a shared environment. Night was not expected to be perfectly uninterrupted. It was expected to be natural. As the hours pass, the village becomes almost dreamlike. The longhouses appear like small islands of warmth scattered across the darkness. Smoke rises, embers glow. The stars continue their endless movement overhead. Nothing feels rushed. Nothing demands immediate attention. The world has entered a slower state, and within that slower state, the body finds permission to rest. Perhaps one of the greatest differences between Viking nights and modern nights was not only the amount of sleep people received. It was the relationship they had with nighttime itself. Night was not something to defeat. It was not an inconvenience between one busy day and another. It was a natural part of life, a space for recovery, a space for connection, a space where the entire village quietly returned to itself. As dawn remains many hours away, the first hints of morning are still hidden beyond the horizon. The villagers continue sleeping, the hearths continue glowing. The stars continue watching from above, but eventually, the darkness will begin to fade. And when it does, these people will not wake because a machine tells them to. They will wake because the world around them has changed. Because light has returned, because the day is calling. Soon, we will discover why Vikings rose with the sunrise, and how living by the natural movement of the sky shaped their entire relationship with sleep. The night has almost finished its journey. Above the village, the endless darkness begins to soften. The stars slowly disappear behind a thin veil of pale morning light, and the eastern horizon changes from deep blue to gentle shades of gray and gold. Inside the longhouse, the first signs of waking begin, not with a loud sound, not with a sudden interruption, but with nature itself. A small opening near the roof allows the earliest light to enter. It touches the wooden beams above, travels across the sleeping platforms, and reaches the faces of those who have rested through the night. The village begins to stir. For people of the Vikings' age, morning was not simply a time on a clock. It was a transformation. The return of sunlight meant the return of activity. A new day had arrived. Long before watches and alarms became common, the movement of the sun guided daily life. The changing light across the landscape told people when to rise, when to work, and when to slow down again. The sky was their natural timekeeper. A farmer waking beneath the first morning glow already understood what the day required. Animals needed care, tools needed preparing, food needed gathering. The land waited for no one. Yet waking with the sunrise was not only about responsibility, it was also about harmony. The body naturally responds to light. When darkness fades and brightness enters the eyes, the mind receives a powerful signal that the resting period is ending. For Viking families, this happened naturally every morning without the need for artificial reminders. The day announced itself. A young child wakes first. He watches the sunlight slowly move across the floor before sitting up beneath his blanket. Nearby, his parents begin preparing the hearth. The first sounds of morning return, wood being placed onto glowing embers, quiet footsteps, the gentle movement of people beginning another day together. There is no sudden rush. The village awakens gradually. Someone steps outside and feels the cold morning air. The snow beneath his boots reflects the rising sun. The frozen fields begin to sparkle. The mountains in the distance slowly reveal themselves beneath the fading darkness. Morning in the north was not always warm. Sometimes it arrived with sharp winds and heavy frost. But even the coldest mornings carried a sense of possibility. The day had begun. As the sun climbed higher, the longhouse changed completely. The peaceful sleeping chamber became a place of activity once again. Blankets were folded, tools were collected, meals were prepared. The same space that provided rest during the night now supported the work of the day. The home itself followed the rhythm of the sun. This connection between waking and daylight shaped more than schedules. It shaped the relationship people had with time. There was less separation between human life and the natural world. The rising sun was not simply something viewed through a window, it was something experienced directly. People felt the seasons changing, they noticed the lengthening days of summer, they felt the returning darkness of winter. They understood time through the landscape around them. Today, many people wake in darkness and immediately create their own artificial morning. Lights turn on. Screens brighten. Machines begin making noise before the sun has even appeared. For Viking families, the world itself performed that role of morning light. Birdsong, the movement of animals, the sounds of neighbors beginning their work, the village awakened together. There was comfort in this shared beginning. Nobody was starting the day completely alone. The same sunrise that touched one longhouse also reached every home nearby. The entire community moved forward beneath the same sky. As the morning continues, the last traces of sleep disappear. The fire burns brighter. The first meal is prepared. The village begins its daily rhythm once again. Yet something about this cycle feels different from the endless rush many people experience today. The day has a clear beginning, the night had a clear ending, each part had its own purpose. Work belonged to daylight, rest belonged to darkness, the boundary between them remained strong. Perhaps this simple pattern helped Vikings protect their sleep. They did not need to convince themselves when the day was over. The world had already told them, and when the evening eventually returned, they would follow the same journey again. Toward warmth, toward darkness, toward rest, the sun rises higher above the snowy village, filling the landscape with quiet golden light. The longhouse doors open, the first footsteps move across the frozen ground. Another day begins. But after witnessing this ancient rhythm, a question remains. If Viking sleep was shaped by nature, family, and tradition, what can people living in the modern world actually learn from it? What pieces of this forgotten way of resting might still matter today? The answer waits in the lessons hidden beneath 1,000 years of history. The morning sun has fully arrived. Its golden light spreads across the village, touching the wooden walls of the longhouses, warming the snow-covered paths, and revealing the landscape that had been hidden beneath the darkness of night. The The villagers have already begun their work. Some carry supplies, some prepare tools, some tend to animals or continue tasks that have existed for generations. The rhythm is familiar, simple, connected. And as you stand quietly watching this world from 1,000 years ago, a strange thought begins to appear. Perhaps the secret of Viking sleep was never really about the blankets, or the beds, or even the fires. Perhaps it was about the way their entire lives moved together. The people of the Vikings' age did not have perfect lives. Their world was difficult. Winters were harsh. Work was demanding. Survival required patience and cooperation, yet hidden inside that challenging world were patterns that many modern people have slowly lost. The first lesson begins with something surprisingly simple: darkness. For Viking families, night was not an enemy. It was a natural invitation to slow down. When the sun disappeared, the world became quieter. The body received a clear message that the active part of the day had ended. Today, many people carry daylight deep into the night. Rooms remain bright. Screens continue glowing. Work follows people home. The mind receives endless reminders to stay awake, even when the body is asking for rest. The Vikings understood something that modern life often forgets. Rest needs a doorway, a gentle transition between activity and sleep. Inside the longhouse, that doorway was created naturally: the evening meal, the soft conversations, the fading fire, the gradual darkness. Each moment prepared the body for what came next. Another lesson can be found in movement. Viking life was not built around planned exercise sessions. The body moved because life required it. Walking, carrying, building, crafting, preparing, these actions connected physical effort with purpose. The goal was never simply to become stronger. The goal was to participate, to contribute, to feel useful. There is a certain peace that comes after meaningful effort. A tired body often welcomes sleep more easily when the day feels complete. The Vikings also remind us of the importance of simple surroundings. Their homes were not filled with endless distractions. A longhouse contained what people needed: warmth, shelter, tools, food, family. The absence of constant stimulation created space for the mind to become quiet. Modern comfort has brought incredible benefits. We can control temperature, communicate across great distances, and make daily tasks easier than our ancestors ever imagined. But convenience does not always create calm. Sometimes the mind needs fewer things competing for attention. The longhouse offered that simplicity. Another forgotten lesson was connection. Viking families rarely experienced nighttime as complete isolation. They slept near one another. They shared meals. They worked together. They experienced the ordinary moments of life as a group. Human beings have always been shaped by connection: a familiar voice, a shared meal, a quiet presence nearby. These things can create a sense of safety that no object can fully replace. The Vikings did not know modern terms like stress management or sleep science, but they understood feelings. They knew that a peaceful mind rests differently from a troubled one. Perhaps that is why their evenings felt so powerful. They created space for the day to end, no unfinished thoughts chasing endlessly into the night. No constant demand to remain connected. Just the simple understanding that tomorrow would arrive when it arrived. Of course, we cannot return completely to the Viking world. Modern life is different, our responsibilities are different, our challenges are different. The goal is not to abandon everything we have created. It is to remember certain forgotten principles, follow natural rhythms when possible, create moments of quiet, allow the mind to slow down, spend meaningful time with others, respect the need for rest. The greatest lesson from the longhouse may not be about sleep at all. It may be about balance, The Vikings lived in a world where every season had a purpose. Summer brought activity. Winter brought reflection. Day brought work. Night brought recovery. Everything had its place. As evening eventually returns to the village, the same longhouse that welcomed morning activity begins preparing for another peaceful night. The fire is rebuilt. The blankets are unfolded. The voices soften. The ancient rhythm continues. And perhaps, after traveling through this forgotten world, we begin to notice something. The secret was never hidden in the past because people were different. The secret was hidden because they listened more closely to something we often ignore, the natural rhythm of being human. The sun begins to lower beyond the distant hills. The village prepares for another night beneath the northern sky. The sun begins its final descent. Across the northern landscape, the golden light slowly disappears behind distant hills, leaving behind long shadows stretching across the snow-covered fields. The village grows quieter with each passing moment. This evening feels familiar. The same wooden walls, the same gentle fire, the same peaceful movement of families preparing for rest, and yet, there is something different about tonight. Perhaps it is because we now understand what this place truly represents. The longhouse is not simply a building made of timber and earth. It is a memory, a place where countless ordinary moments unfolded. Where children learned their first lessons. Where families shared their meals, where tired travelers found warmth, where generations closed their eyes beneath the same northern sky. For the people of the Vikings' age, this was home, not a perfect home, not an easy home, but a home shaped by everything they needed. As the evening begins, the familiar sounds return. Wood is placed into the hearth. The last meal of the day is prepared. Wool blankets are removed from storage. Tools are carefully put away until morning. Every movement feels almost like a quiet farewell. An elderly woman sits near the fire, her hands resting calmly in her lap. She looks around the longhouse, seeing details that others might overlook. The marks carved into wooden beams, the repaired sections of old furniture, the places where children once played, the corner where family members gathered during storms. Every part of the room carries a story. A longhouse was never only made from materials, it was made from moments. The fire burns brighter as darkness arrives. Its glow touches the faces of everyone nearby. A young child listens to an old story beside the hearth, just as countless children before him once did. The words may change slightly with every generation, but the feeling remains the same. A connection between the past and the future. Outside, the village settles into silence. The wind moves gently across the fields. The ocean rests beneath the night sky. The forests stand quietly in the distance. The world beyond the walls is vast, but tonight it feels peaceful. Inside, the longhouse prepares for sleep one final time. The family members move toward their sleeping platforms, the same wooden beds that supported them through countless nights. The same wool blankets that protected them through endless winters, the same hearth that watched over them until morning. Nothing about this moment appears extraordinary, and perhaps that is what makes it meaningful. History is often remembered through great battles, famous rulers, and dramatic events, but most people who ever lived experienced something much simpler. They woke, they worked, they ate, they loved, they rested. Their lives were built from thousands of quiet moments that no historian could fully record. Yet those moments mattered. As everyone settles beneath their blankets, the longhouse becomes still. The fire continues its gentle rhythm. The wooden beams hold steady above. The night surrounds the home. You notice how different the darkness feels now compared with when we first arrived. At the beginning, the night seemed mysterious, perhaps even intimidating, but after spending time here, it feels different. It feels protective. It feels familiar. The darkness is no longer something empty, it is simply another part of the world, a place where the body rests, a place where memories settle, a place where tomorrow quietly waits. The youngest children fall asleep first, then the adults. Finally, even the oldest members of the household close their eyes. The longhouse is almost completely silent, only the hearth remains awake. Its embers glow like tiny stars beneath a layer of ash. And for a moment, it feels as though time itself has stopped. No future, no past, only this one peaceful night beneath a wooden roof in the far north. But history never truly stops. The world outside this longhouse will continue changing. New generations will arrive, new homes will be built, new ideas will replace old ones. Eventually, the age of the Viking longhouse will fade into memory, yet the feeling created inside these walls will remain: the desire for warmth, the need for connection, the search for peaceful rest. These things belong not only to one culture or one period of history, they belong to everyone. The fire burns lower, the final log settles into glowing embers, the longhouse rests, and as we prepare to leave this ancient home behind, one final mystery remains. The Vikings did not experience sleep the same way throughout the entire year. Their nights changed, their routines changed, their relationship with darkness changed, because in the far north, even sleep itself moved with the seasons. The first light of spring arrives differently. After months of darkness, the northern sky slowly begins to change. The days stretch a little longer. The snow that covered the fields begins to soften. Small streams appear beneath melting ice, carrying the first signs that the frozen world is preparing to wake. Inside the longhouse, the rhythm changes too. The blankets remain warm. The hearth still burns, the familiar wooden walls still provide shelter, but something has shifted. The people inside are no longer living according to the deepest darkness of winter. They are moving with the return of the sun. For the people of the Vikings' age, sleep was never completely separated from the changing seasons. Their rest followed the natural cycle of the world around them. Winter invited longer nights. Summer demanded longer days. Spring created a gentle transition between the two. Life itself breathed in and out with the landscape. During the darkest months, when the sun disappeared early and returned slowly, evenings naturally became longer. Families spent more time indoors, gathered around the hearth, sharing meals, repairing tools, creating clothing, and telling stories. Sleep could arrive earlier. Mornings could begin later. The darkness created a larger space for rest, but as the days expanded, the village began changing. The same people who once spent long hours beside the fire now found themselves preparing for the busy months ahead. The fields needed attention, boats required repairs, animals needed more care. The approaching warmth brought opportunity, but it also brought responsibility. The rhythm of sleep adjusted. A farmer might wake earlier as sunlight entered the longhouse sooner. A fisher might prepare for journeys that were impossible during harsh winter conditions. A craftsperson might spend longer hours outside using the returning daylight. The sun became a silent guide. Not a strict command, not something forcing people to follow an exact schedule, simply a natural signal that life was entering another phase. Imagine standing outside a Viking settlement during a summer evening. The difference from winter would feel almost unbelievable. The darkness that once arrived quickly now waited patiently. The sky remained bright long after the day's work was finished. In the far northern regions, summer nights could become almost endless periods of twilight, with the sun barely disappearing before returning again. This changed the relationship people had with nighttime. The world was no longer inviting them toward long hours of sleep. Instead, it encouraged activity. More light meant more possibilities, more time for travel, more time for gathering resources, more time to prepare for the next winter. Yet even during the brightest seasons, rest remained important. The body still needed recovery, families still gathered in the evenings, the hearth still provided comfort, the longhouse still became a place of quiet when the day finally ended. The seasons changed the length of sleep, but they did not change the need for it. This is perhaps one of the most fascinating parts of Viking life. They did not attempt to overpower nature, they adapted to it. When winter arrived, they slowed down. When summer returned, they became more active. Their lives expanded and contracted with the world around them. Today, many people experience the same schedule throughout the entire year, the same indoor temperatures, the same artificial lighting, the same expectations of productivity regardless of season. But the Vikings lived inside a different kind of relationship with time. They noticed the small changes, the length of shadows, the temperature of the air, the behavior of animals, the movement of the sun. These details shaped their daily choices. A winter night beside the hearth felt completely different from a summer evening beneath a bright northern sky, yet both belonged to the same natural cycle. As another year passed, the longhouse witnessed the same pattern again and again. Darkness arrived, light returned, sleep changed, life changed. Then the cycle began once more. Perhaps this was another forgotten reason Viking sleep appeared so peaceful. They were not fighting against the rhythm of the world, they were following it. The seasons were not obstacles, they were guides. And as our journey through the longhouse approaches its final moments, one question remains. After everything we have discovered, after the fires, the blankets, the meals, the storms, and the silent nights, what feeling remains when we finally step away from this ancient world? What can a 1,000-year-old Viking home still whisper to us today? The answer waits in the final glow of the hearth. The final embers are glowing. The great fire that has warmed this longhouse through countless evenings has become a quiet collection of golden sparks. The flames that once reached toward the wooden beams above now rest gently beneath a blanket of ash. Outside, the northern night stretches peacefully across the land. The forests are still, the fields are silent. The stars watch over a world that has changed many times since these homes first stood beneath the sky, and yet, inside this ancient longhouse, something feels strangely familiar. A person sleeping beside warmth, a family gathering before night, a tired body searching for comfort, a mind hoping for a moment of peace. These feelings do not belong only to the people of the Vikings' age, they belong to all of us. More than 1,000 years ago, people living in the far north discovered rest in a world that demanded patience. They lived without electricity, without modern mattresses, without the endless lights and sounds that follow many people into the night today. Their lives were not easier. They faced cold winters, difficult work, uncertain journeys, the challenges of surviving in a demanding landscape. But within those challenges, they built something powerful, a rhythm, a connection between the day and the night, between effort and recovery, between the outside world and the quiet safety of home. Perhaps the greatest secret of Viking sleep was never hidden inside the wool blanket or the warmth of the hearth. Perhaps it was hidden in the way they lived. They allowed the day to end. They respected darkness. They shared their evenings with others. They moved their bodies with purpose. They listened to the changing seasons. They understood that rest was not wasted time. It was part of life itself. The longhouse teaches us something simple. A peaceful night does not begin when we close our eyes. It begins much earlier. It begins with the moments we create before sleep arrives. A quiet meal, a meaningful conversation, a gentle slowing of the mind, a place where we feel safe enough to let go. The Vikings did not have perfect nights. They experienced discomfort. They woke during storms. They worried about the future. They faced the same emotions that every human being has carried throughout history, but they understood something many people still search for today: the feeling of being connected. Connected to family, connected to nature, connected to the rhythm of the world around them. As we slowly step away from the longhouse, the sounds become softer, the crackling fire fades behind us, the wooden door closes gently, the warmth remains inside. For a moment, we stand outside beneath the same sky that watched over these ancient homes. The stars above have changed little, the wind still moves through the forests. The seasons still follow their endless cycle, and somewhere beneath that same northern sky, the memory of these quiet nights remains. Maybe the Vikings did not sleep better because they had discovered a forgotten trick. Maybe they slept better because they were not constantly separated from the world around them. They knew when to work, they knew when to stop, they knew when the darkness arrived. It was time to rest, and perhaps that is the question this journey leaves behind, not whether Vikings truly slept better than we ever will, but whether we have forgotten something they never lost. The ability to slow down, the ability to be present, the ability to let the world become quiet, because even after 1,000 years, the human heart still searches for the same things: warmth, safety, connection, peace. The final spark inside the hearth disappears, the longhouse becomes completely dark, but the story does not truly end here, because every forgotten world leaves behind a doorway, a question, a mystery waiting to be explored. And beyond the darkness of this ancient northern night, countless other stories remain hidden, other civilizations, other homes, other forgotten moments when ordinary people lived, dreamed, and rested beneath unfamiliar skies. So as you close your eyes and return to your own world, remember the quiet longhouse, remember the gentle fire, remember the people who lived beneath the northern stars, and wonder what other secrets of the past are still waiting to be discovered.